This picture was supposed to be a simple, spontaneous moment for this young couple. She would pose, and he would press capture. But the moment this woman's boyfriend peeked through the lens of his camera, he felt a shiver run all the way down his spine. He turned pale instantly, and for good reason, because behind her, something appeared that wasn't supposed to be there. Something that would come back to haunt them. Man takes photo of girlfriend, turns pale when he looks behind her. The picture might have been spontaneous, but the photo location was definitely not without reason. David and Amber had just bought a new house and stood in their front garden when Amber asked for a nice picture with their home in the background. A good idea, David thought at first. But sadly enough, they never got to that moment. Instead, David screamed, followed up by him shaking all over. Amber stood as still as she could and held a smile while looking at the camera. But then her boyfriend's sudden scream snapped Amber back to reality. She looked at her boyfriend's pale face and followed the direction of his shaking finger. It was pointing at something behind her, but what was it? Amber slowly turned around, squinting her eyes and trying to figure out what he was gesturing at. Her eyes moved in the direction of the house. She scanned it for a moment, not knowing where to look. But then, her heart skipped a beat, and she suddenly screamed as well before looking back at David in horror. There was someone standing behind the attic window of their house. "TT, this can't be. We live alone." "Honey, I'm scared," Amber nervously said to her boyfriend, who shared her concern. Amber felt her eyes grow larger by the second. She now stood beside her boyfriend, silently observing the figure. The individual moved around the attic, not knowing it was being watched, grabbing things as they lived there. Amber and David could not see many details from this distance since the attic only had a dim light that was shining. But knowing that there was someone up there was scary enough. David and Amber felt fear building up inside their bodies, but knew they had to do something. Together, they quickly ran back to their house. However, as David quickly passed on, Amber's steps didn't. She stopped as they reached the front door and stared at her boyfriend. Fear was etched across her face, her eyes darting back and forth between the door and David. "I don't know if I want to go inside." David understood that Amber was scared and nodded reassuringly, indicating that he would handle it alone. While she waited outside, he quickly went up the stairs to reach the attic. Every step upward filled him with nervousness. So when David finally made it to the top, he paused momentarily, taking a deep breath while his heart pounded in his chest. He slowly pushed the door open to peer inside. After opening the door, David was surprised to find the attic motionless. There were some standard objects, but nothing out of the ordinary. Even the light had been switched off. He stared into the room, wondering if the individual was hiding somewhere. David moved boxes and peeked behind every piece of furniture but found nothing. Puzzled and slightly relieved, he called down to Amber, "There's nobody here." But that statement couldn't be more wrong. David stood still for a moment, his mind racing. "Did I imagine it?" he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "But if I did, how can Amber have seen the same thing?" Then his eyes caught sight of the window. It was open. That could possibly be an escape route out of the house, he thought. David rushed to look outside, but only saw his girlfriend in the garden below. Did she see anything? David quickly closed and locked the window. He ran downstairs, where Amber still stood anxiously waiting, and asked, "Did you see anyone run away?" Amber nodded negatively and responded, "No, I didn't see anyone." They looked at each other, feeling even more scared and confused. David was frightened when he was up in the attic before. But living in a house plagued by the unknown might be worse. David rubbed his temples. "I must be going crazy," he whispered as he tried to make sense of it all. But then Amber suddenly grabbed his hand and said, "You're not crazy, David. I saw it, too. There was definitely someone up there. We can't both be wrong about this." They decided to do one last search in the attic, and this time, Amber went along with her boyfriend. But their search was futile, as they found nothing indicating someone else was ever in their house. So, David and Amber eventually tried to sleep and forget all about the day's eerie events. But when the first morning light shone into their room, they awoke from a stumbling sound from the attic. David opened his eyes and saw that Amber was already sitting up straight in the bed. Was the person back? They quickly put on some robes and rushed up the stairs. When the couple entered, they were once again met with an empty and silent room. But this time, they would not leave empty-handed because this time David immediately noticed something. The window he closed and locked yesterday was open again. David distinctively remembered locking it on purpose to ensure nobody could enter, so how was it now unlocked and wide open? Their hearts raced. An intruder yesterday, stumbling sounds in the morning, and now an open window? Is someone breaking into our house? Or did the person never leave? Amber whispered. But before David could respond, an ominous sound sent shivers down their spines. They held their breath and listened carefully. There was a distinct scratching noise coming from the closet. Was the intruder hiding inside? They were about to find out. David mustered up courage and took the lead in slowly approaching the closet. He hesitated slightly and then flung the door open. But what jumped out at them was not what they expected. They stepped backward out of initial fright, but sighed in relief as they realized it was a cat who jumped out. But that relief was short-lived because this cat was not the figure they saw in the window. With caution, David grabbed the cat, intending to bring it with them. But that was easier said than done because the cat wriggled free as they reached the bottom step. It sprinted back upstairs, straight to the attic, as if it belonged there. Amber and David exchanged a bewildered look as their new housemate gave them more questions than answers. But they would soon find out why that animal haunted the top floor. Everything, from the shadowy figure in the attic to the mysterious cat, felt alarming to the couple. David gasped as a sudden idea crossed his mind. Maybe the neighbor knew something about the house's past or the strange things they were experiencing in it. So, hopeful to finally get some answers, David and Amber walked next door. And answers they would get. Just not the ones they hoped for. When David and Amber rang the doorbell, a blonde-haired woman answered. And when she did, David did not hesitate to ask what bothered them. He described the events and painted a picture for the overwhelmed neighbor. They told her about the cat they found and the figure in the window. Who owned the cat? And what was happening? Unfortunately for them, he only got an answer to half of his questions. The neighbor didn't have an explanation for what happened with the mysterious figure behind the window. But when David mentioned the cat, the next-door lady knew exactly what to say. She explained that the cat belonged to the previous owner, who now lived in a nursing home 2 towns over. The cat might have returned to its old house, which could have caused the strange sounds and sights they noticed. At least the mystery of the cat was now somewhat resolved, which pleased them. However, David and Amber shared a puzzled expression as the main mystery of the shadowy figure was still unexplained. And that part gave them the most worry. The couple wondered who or what could have been in their house while their gazes subconsciously drifted toward the attic window. And that's when everything happened very quickly. Their gaze was meant to remember their last night's fright, but the same fright returned on this day when they looked at the window. Because behind the attic window, the figure appeared again. It moved around and even stared out the window, appearing to them as just a black silhouette from this distance. They alarmed the neighbor, who also looked up just in time to catch a glimpse of the person's arm. "Call the police." The neighbor spoke with a frightened voice. It was clear that they weren't mistaken. Someone was breaking into their home, and their neighbor had just confirmed it. The woman already had a phone in hand and was dialing 911 to ask a police officer for assistance. But before she pressed call, David stopped her. "I have a better plan," he said with a confident look on his face. David started by taking his neighbor's hand and guiding her to their house. "For this plan to work, I need you to stay right here and keep looking up. Watch that window like a hawk and see if someone comes out. We will sneak inside quietly and will try to surprise the intruder." This assignment made the next-door woman nervous, but she quietly agreed. "Let's go," David whispered. With their neighbor waiting nervously outside, David and Amber snuck upstairs. They rushed the last time, but this time, they made sure to be as quiet as a mouse. And it worked because while they didn't even hear their own footsteps, they heard the individual still walking in the attic. The attic door was pushed open slowly, and David immediately spotted the closed window. That meant that the intruder was still inside. A rumbling sound was heard from inside the closet again. "This is it, we've got him," David whispered to Amber. He knew it wasn't the cat this time because the old owner's cat was sitting in the middle of the room when they entered. The animal watched David's and Amber's every move, almost like it wanted them to catch this trespasser. Nerves grew as the couple inched toward the closet door. Together, they edged toward the closet door slowly. Their movements were like a sloth, but at least they were quiet this time. Eventually, David's hand reached the handle once more, gripping it tightly. The young couple looked at each other, not uttering a single word. But they didn't need to, their minds were synchronized perfectly. David and Amber nodded in silence, making rhythmic motions with their heads, indicating a countdown, 1, 2, 3. Dave pushed the handle down and pulled hard on the closet door, opening it swiftly. Their bodies were tense and ready to fight the perpetrator hiding in their closet. At least, that was what they expected before entering the attic floor. What they found in the closet, however, was far less dangerous. A young girl jumped out and tried to escape. But David halted her getaway by grabbing her just in time. "Who are you?" The girl screamed from the top of her lungs, ordering David to let her go at once. But Amber had enough of these unexpected moments, so she closed the door behind her and pushed her back against it. Now, the girl had no way of escaping, meaning she had to provide them with answers. The young girl also realized that her resistance was futile at that point and stopped fighting David. She loosened her shoulders and started crying softly. While tears streamed down her cheek, she crouched and held out her arms, which made the cat run toward the mysterious girl and jump on her lap. The girl patted the cat, hoping it would derail the couple's question. But David was determined. "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" he asks. "That is none of your business, sir," the girl answered. But then, out of nowhere, the truth was revealed when Amber felt a push in her back. There was someone on the other side of the attic door. But who was it? The young woman stepped to the side, and the attic door instantly swung open. It was the next-door neighbor. She had abandoned her post and had an angry look on her face. It was directed toward the little girl. Did these two know each other? "Millie, what the hell are you doing here?" Both Amber and David looked at the woman in the door opening with a confused look. What was she doing here? Why did she leave her post? And why did she know this girl's name? But then the woman explained that this little girl was her daughter. She was supposed to be still in bed, so there is no excuse for you being here bothering these nice people, Millie. She shouted at her daughter. But Millie said she could explain. Millie had a guilty look on her face. After all, she was in another family's home, that was true. But according to her, she had a good reason for being here. Millie revealed that she had been coming to the attic for some time. It all started with the voice, Millie said. The voice? Everyone responded at the same time. Millie said that the voices called her over, saying she should come here. I first heard the voice at night. I couldn't sleep because the wind was gushing past my window, keeping me up. But then a sound cut through. It was soft but clear as day. I opened the window and listened. According to Millie, the voice was polite and inviting, asking her to use the 3 that connected the 2 houses to come in. The little girl climbed over and stepped through the open window. Once inside, the little girl found the same thing David and Amber did. A cat sitting all by herself in the middle of the attic. But the young girl recognized it instantly as her old neighbor's pet. The little thing was cold and hungry, so I wrapped it in a blanket and fed it. Pretty soon, I visited multiple times a day to take care of it. Millie was still talking when Amber interrupted her. Wait a moment, Millie. So, there was a cat, but you said it started with a voice calling you over. Cats can't speak, so who invited you into the house? Amber said while being very confused still. Millie's mom started laughing carefully, saying it was probably her daughter's wild imagination. Millie always lived in her own little fantasy world, making up friends and going on adventures. But that wasn't the case this time. Because this time, Millie said something that caught everyone's attention instantly. And what was even more bizarre was what she showed them immediately afterward. "No, Mom, this time, it's not my imagination. Someone did ask me to come over here, and I can prove it to you all." Millie's statement captivated everyone in the room. They looked at her with large eyes, wondering what the little girl would show them. Millie didn't say anything because she simply wanted to show them something. The little girl turned 90 degrees and started walking to the backside of the attic. She stood in front of a plain wall, which confused everyone. What on earth could be so special here? But then Millie started pulling on one of the wooden planks that made up the back wall. It came loose, and Millie pulled it to the side. And what they saw next made everyone gasp in amazement. A sizable hollow space was revealed behind the plank. Normally, you could expect insulation behind these back walls, but it was all gone here. Millie invited David to take a closer look, and he obliged. And when he placed his head through the open hole, he was left in shock. He saw a ladder that led all the way to the ground floor. The sight of the ladder scared David beyond words, and not for the reason you might expect. Finding a hidden ladder in your home is, of course, unexpected and scary. But what scared David the most was that his main question remained unanswered. He explained to his next-door neighbor that the figure they saw behind the attic window was much taller than Millie. It was adult in height. This explanation made tension grow. David figured that this was the person's way into their house. He made that assumption out loud, and Millie responded by saying that this was very well possible. The little girl clearly knew more about this mysterious figure, so the couple encouraged her to shed some light on the situation. Millie agreed that it was time and obliged by yelling down the ladder. "It's over. You can come up now." A fumbling sound was heard at the base of the ladder, which made Millie's mom look at her daughter in shock. Until this point, she still held on to the thought that her daughter's imagination was the problem. But the sound of somebody climbing up made it all very real. Amber also put her head in the wall hole and saw the top of a head inch up the ladder. "What the hell?" she shouted as she took a large step back. David even tripped as he tried to get away from the ladder. The young man was scrambling back to his feet when the individual reached the top of the ladder. Millie had a stale face because she knew who this was. But the three of them fixed their eyes on the opening in the back wall. Who was going to come up? When the individual stuck her head into the open attic space for the first time, the next-door neighbor broke the early silence first. "Meredith? Is that you?" she said in shock. It was clear that these two women knew each other very well because the scared look on the neighbor's face disappeared instantly. "Who is this woman? And what is she doing in our house?" Amber asked in confusion. The figure saw that the couple was still terrified, so she wasted no time explaining who she was. The elderly woman who climbed up the stairs was the former owner of the house, Meredith Tinsdale. After presenting this revelation, she hoped that David and Amber would calm down a bit, but they weren't satisfied until they knew everything about her. "How is this possible, Meredith?" the neighbor asked. "You are supposed to be in a nursing home 2 towns over," the neighbor said. Somehow, that statement made the old woman angry, and she started yelling as a result. Her head turned red, and it almost seemed like Meredith was beginning to cry. She said that she never wanted to go back to that prison again. "I escaped once, and I will die before someone brings me back there." Meredith explained why the nursing home felt like a prison to her. They dictated every part of her day from start to finish. They told her to get up. They had pre-made and pre-chosen meals ready for her. And even when she knew what she wanted to do with her day, the staff denied it, saying they already had plans. It was horrible, so I eventually escaped that place when I saw the chance. I wanted to come home the instant I left that horrid place, but there was a problem, Meredith stated. David and Amber could already guess her next sentence because, at that moment in time, they were already the new owners of the home. Therefore, Meredith's old home wasn't an option anymore. She chose the next best thing and settled in a shack in the forest behind the house. On paper, the shack and the forest property around it were still owned by her family, so no one would notice that she lived there. There was only one problem, and it involved Meredith's cat. Once Meredith settled into the shack, her cat immediately recognized the grounds from her former territory again. As a result, it fled back to Meredith's old home constantly. And Meredith couldn't go back herself because I'm old and rusty, of course, so climbing up there is tough. But the more important reason is that you two already lived here when my cat settled into the attic. I, therefore, knew I had to find a solution, Meredith explained. That's when the old woman enlisted the help of little Millie. When David and Amber were sleeping, she spoke to her at night and convinced her to enter the attic. Millie promised to look after that cat, and I promised to help as often as possible. I usually come up here once a day to help with the main care, and the rest is provided by the lovely Millie, Meredith said gratefully. Meredith continued her explanation by saying that the ladder was already there. Her now-deceased husband built the ladder as a hidden fire escape. But now it was my secret way in. David and Amber were in shock after hearing the whole story. All their questions were answered, but the bewildered expression on their faces remained. Meredith hoped they would understand why she did what she did, but she feared the worst. I have to go back to the nursing home, right? But David and Amber's reaction to the elderly woman was nothing like that. It was beyond what she had ever imagined. The couple each held out a hand and pulled the old woman close. Meredith was met with a huge hug, followed by a voice of understanding. Her story touched them tremendously, and the tears in Amber's eyes proved it. They did not want to send Meredith back to the nursing home. In fact, they wanted to do quite the opposite. The young couple offered to help the old woman. But how? They all used the main stairs to step out of the house, and together, they walked to the forest where Meredith's shack stood. It was a sad sight to behold because the shack was old and musky and looked hardly livable in this state. This is no place for anyone to live, especially not someone as old as you, Amber said with a tear in her eyes. But I think we can change that. Meredith couldn't believe the kindness of these people. They didn't even know her personally, but were willing to help her regain her old life. Their commitment made the old woman break down in tears. You will let me continue living here? And you will fix my shack? Why are you showing all this kindness? You don't owe me anything. But Amber and David had a good reason for this. Amber explained to Meredith that she saw the same thing with her own mother. At first, they didn't know any better, so they arranged for Amber's mother to live in a nursing home. But pretty soon after moving in, Amber's mother started to deteriorate. She became aimless and lost her bubbling personality. So that's when Amber and David decided to take her in. She lived with us until she passed away last year. Amber said it was the best decision she ever made, and they wanted to offer the same treatment to Meredith. Nobody should go through what my mom went through there. Will you let us help you? Meredith was at a loss for words, but accepted their offer gladly. And David and Amber's kind offer was even met with a generous counteroffer by Meredith. One that put a smile on the young couple's face. The old lady offered to give them the deeds to the remaining forest grounds. It was a 2-acre property that included the shack Meredith lived in, as well as a beautiful lake. It was a good deal for the young couple because this offer increased their property value tremendously. The three of them shook hands and smiled while the next-door neighbor and her little girl were present as witnesses. The increase in owned property also had another advantage for all parties involved. With the deeds now firmly in the hands of David and Amber, it was much easier to renovate Meredith's shack. They didn't even need an official permit because the cabin size was below a certain square footage. So, instead of waiting around, they could start right away. Building teams were hired, and David even helped. Let's get started. After a couple of months of hard work, they finished the complete renovation of Meredith's new home. It was a beautiful place now, made out of fine lumber. It was small but insulated and, most of all, very cozy. Meredith was overjoyed because the renovation blew new life into something her husband had started building years prior. She moved in and settled fine. And the cat seemed to like it as well. The little cat that first frightened David and Amber was now a property pet to all. She walked freely between their homes and was loved by all inhabitants. Meredith herself became part of the family, too. She visited often and even stayed over for Christmas. Millie and her mother were there too. They ate together, shared presents together, and grew their bond. "I love all of you," she said.